Hello and welcome to this interview with Sonia Gill. Sonia is a brilliant education leadership coach. She runs a company called Heads Up, and if you Google Heads Up Sonia Gill, you will find it, or Heads Up Education, you'll find it. Her focus is on primary schools and helping primary schools to become outstanding in inspection context, but also, and I think possibly from my perspective anyway, more importantly, what they consider to be outstanding themselves and their community considers to be outstanding themselves in their own context. So I think she blends that very well. But I think what her background does is give her a unique ability to blend kind of business and corporate skills with education learning skills. She is able to get that kind of high-performing teams thing that she's learned through the very prestigious John Lewis Partnership Leadership Development Program that she was accepted onto as a graduate, spending many years developing high-performing teams, and then she's able to bring that into the education sector. I can see how they benefit each other and how they complement each other. When you look at the website itself, it's full of free resources. I'm just going to do a little website tour for you. I'm going to put my glasses on for this. There's a free e-course on how to structure a difficult conversation. We have 3 programs to support schools develop the 3 key strategies needed for their journey to outstanding. So you've got first steps to outstanding, moving to outstanding, and outstanding and beyond. You've then got some testimonials. She's learned clearly to take very complex things and make them as simple as possible. Simple stuff is usually very complex in the background. So everything she does has this kind of simple framework around it, and yet achieving very complex outcomes. This is the Journey to Outstanding book, and you can get 4 free chapters, which I think is very generous. Gives you a little insight into that book. And these are some of the services: Successful Difficult Conversations program and the coaching. Let's just dip into the Successful Difficult Conversations. That kind of strategy and vision, and the Difficult Conversations agenda they're interdependent. I think certainly that's what comes out of it for me, and this notion that developing a culture through these kind of difficult but ultimately positive conversations, how you manage the conversation, how you go into it, how you deal with nerves, that kind of thing. And then on this page here, you've got a brochure, PDF brochure. Again, everything Sonia does and Heads Up do is just beautifully presented, really nicely done, easy to follow, and it kind of teases out some of the things that often people kind of say, gosh, yes, that's me, and you realise that many other people are in the same position. So again, you can see the way things are well structured, worth a look. So we go back up, various conferences and events. Then you've got articles. She's very good at kind of taking stuff from the book but updating it, keeping it live and interesting through current context. And the blog's usually got something in there that the books don't have. So again, reminder, this is all free, and that's even before we've got to the free resources section on the website. It's really impressive how much she gives away for free, I have to say. And then you obviously the opportunity to get in contact. So hopefully that's a useful little kind of whistle-stop tour. We know that you have to look at these things yourselves and make your own judgments, but we're just really pleased and happy to have Sonia on board for this interview. So David Gower is conducting the interview. And that is David Gower, the assistant head teacher, by the way, practicing assistant head teacher rather than David Gower, the England cricketer. If you're familiar with cricket, then David Gower was a brilliant batsman and was England captain. So no, this David Gower is arguably more impressive, possibly more famous. But what David is really good at is bringing out those really practical tools that can be used on a day-to-day basis. So as a practicing assistant head, he kind of knows in tune with what people need, I think, and that comes across strongly in the interview.
the difference between a school getting to good and getting to great is all around culture. And I think it's one of the reasons why we see such a small number of schools actually break through that glass ceiling of good. When we're looking at culture, we look at three key aspects: having a really powerful vision, growing excellence in the team. But one that is a hot topic is exactly as you said, the topic of this book, which is having difficult conversations successfully. And it's an area of real passion for me, because I learned very quickly how important it was as a leader to be able to talk about the tough stuff well. But even if you don't want to take a school to become genuinely outstanding, or if you think, actually, yes, it sounds very nice to create a high performing culture, but we're not there yet, regardless of the level of your ambition, if you're a leader, you just need to have difficult conversations. It's such a key management and leadership skill, and yet it's one that most people aren't trained in. That's why.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. This notion that really, as middle leaders, senior leaders, it doesn't always feel like we're really told sort of how to go about that, how to structure those conversations, the do's and don'ts. Some of that just comes through experience, but actually to know how to go into it in the first place, really, really important. And I really enjoyed that about your book, the kind of clear structure and approach to take when you have those conversations. I wonder if you could just tell us, why is it important then that we have those difficult conversations in schools, and what are the implications if we don't have them?
It's a really good question. Because don't get me wrong, I don't love conflict, and like anyone else, I would rather not have a difficult conversation. But there's a lot to be gained if we do, and I think there's kind of different levels of gain. So we've got the cost. I've got if you go on my website, you can see a calculator, and even in the book, there's a calculator for working out how much conflict is costing you, and that's often the issues that aren't resolved, aren't even tackled, that exist. You're looking at around 1 FTE per school in an average primary, and around 2 in an average size secondary school. Now that's a lot in terms of the money, but also the time. Think of what all that time could be used for if those issues didn't exist, or if they were quickly resolved. But the thing that I think is the most important and the most powerful is the impact it has on its children, on our children, and how actually that's the place where it all lands. So I quite often share with people 5 common difficult conversations that I see in schools. Are you happy for me to share them quickly now?
Yeah, I think that'd be really useful. I actually had that in my notes as one of the things I might ask you about, actually, because I think, again, I really like that in the book. There's a really key kind of clear examples of what it looks like in a school. So if we could hear some of those, that'd be really helpful.
Yeah, so I find, I've been supporting schools in this way since 2011, and I find, my team and I come across 5 particular difficult conversations that keep cropping up. And most schools have at least one, typically a couple of these. So one is what I like to call Miss Tardy, a late teaching assistant. I have nothing against teaching assistants. I've met many wonderful ones. I've worked with many wonderful ones, but lateness typically sits with teaching assistants. I've only once in 10 years heard of a teacher where there's been a lateness issue.
Okay.
Then we've got Mr. My Way. So this is the person who wants to not necessarily follow the school's policies or practices, perhaps wants to mark in their own way, or not mark as frequently, or do behaviour policies slightly differently, and so on. And kind of they like to do it their way, or resist the way the school does it. We then got a classic one, caretakers. Difficult conversations with caretakers come up all the time. I call them Mr. Manana. Kind of happen tomorrow. There's quite often a power dynamic between a head teacher and a caretaker. Typically, and no offence to caretakers, because again, I've met brilliant caretakers, but typically you can find that the caretaker thinks that they run the school, they know best, and the head teacher should get in line. The other one that comes up quite often is receptionists. I call Mrs. Watt. That kind of, you're an inconvenience when you come to reception, that whole kind of warm welcome that I've seen plenty of wonderful receptionists do. There are some receptionists who sadly, they don't greet people as warmly perhaps as we'd like.
Okay.
And then This one, again, if people are watching, maybe they're kind of nodding, going, yeah, I know that one. I hope not. I hope you don't have these issues in your school. But the fifth one that comes up quite often is that person who wears their special face in staff meetings. You know that... I call that kind of character, if you like, Mrs. Dementor, because they kind of suck the life out of everyone in the room, and you just, they can really, unfortunately, grab the attention of the person who's presenting, whatever it is, and make them feel really insecure, and permeate this kind of mood hoover vibe throughout that conversation, that meeting, which could otherwise feel quite different.
I'm worried that might have been me at times. I'm listening to that thing. Oh God, that's not me.
There's a difference between the thinking face, because thinking faces are quite serious. Thinking faces, are kind of thoughtful, they're looking at processing it, but sometimes there is just this isn't going to work. I've seen it all before. You really think I'm going to do that? There's kind of that vibe. I'm not saying that's necessarily what's being thought, but there's that vibe about it. And most people, when I talk about the special face, they get someone in mind pretty quickly. The thing about this is that they look like 5 unrelated issues. Someone's late, someone wants to mark the way they want to, someone's a bit rude on reception or not welcoming, and they're 5 unrelated issues. So what I find really useful is to think about, let's think about a student then. Let's think about Mohammed, a year 6 EAL student, wants to do well. He's off to secondary school next year, and his parents want him to do well, even though, and they're very aware that their English isn't at the level that could support their son as much as they'd hope. So let's look at a day for Mohammed then. He comes into school keen to learn. He's meant to have a reading intervention, except his TA, Miss Tardy, is a bit late. So he has a few minutes of reading and he goes back into class. Keenly, he opens his literacy book and his teacher has just put a tick and good. Mohammed was looking to see what he needed to improve, but actually it looks like he got it all right. Fantastic. Break time comes, he runs out onto the playground with his friends to play with his favourite bit of equipment, except it's still cordoned off because the caretaker, Mr. Manana, hasn't fixed it. His parents come into school, very aware of their own lack of language skills in English, wanting to find out what can we do? Is there anything that we could do to help our son? Any resources? When the receptionist, Mrs. Watt, finally stops what she's doing and comes over and says, yes, what do you want? They feel like they probably shouldn't have come in. Maybe they should have called in advance. They ask about a club, take a leaflet, make their excuses and go. In the afternoon, there's a buzz around the school because all these new projects and models are coming out, and Mohammed wonders when his class are going to do it. What he doesn't know is that when this new curriculum, when the exciting new opportunities and creation were presented and talked about in a staff meeting, his teacher, Mr. Myway, and Mrs. Dementor sat there like that. Keep doing what I'm doing, thank you very much. So Mohammed enjoys his days. He has good days, he does his best, he looks for his feedback if he gets it. But these 5 unrelated issues all come down onto him and everyone in his class and anyone in his school who are affected by those issues. And that's why it's so important that we learn how to do this well. I'm not here kind of going, oh, you're all avoiding difficult conversations and you need to kind of, pull yourselves together and have them. No, it is a skill. We do need to learn it. But when we do learn it, we can resolve these issues so quickly. And imagine if we just fix 3 of those things for Mohammed. What a difference that would make to the quality of education he has. Yeah. So for me, that's the real cost of difficult conversations. I'm a teacher first and foremost. The thought of our children not getting the highest level of education hurts me as much as it hurts anyone.
That's really, really interesting. I never considered it, in that way, the interconnectivity between all those different examples. But, I think that's really key, isn't it? Always coming back to what the young people are entitled to, what are they getting? And then, let's go from there and let's think about that. And that's perhaps if we're ever worrying about those conversations, if we're ever thinking, I've got to have a difficult conversation here, remembering that we're doing it because the young people are at the center of it is going to drive us forward to have that conversation maybe. Yeah. Is it possible to give us maybe some common mistakes that people make when they have some difficult conversations? I'm thinking of sort of people having some examples here they can take away.
Yeah, definitely. So the biggest, well, I think there are three key, I guess, problems that occur that point to mistakes. So three problems that occur are those difficult conversations. So the first one is those difficult conversations where you walk away thinking that person didn't hear the message I needed them to hear. Even though we think we've been really clear, you know, maybe you come back to them later and think, no, that wasn't what I was really getting at, or they just walk out and you think they didn't hear it. That's down to not structuring the conversation properly. A common issue actually is the emotional burden that we carry with us. Even though we're not the recipient of the difficult conversation, just initiating it takes chunks from us. And the bigger the problem, or the more extensive the problem, the more consuming it becomes. So we can feel that anxiety, stress, worry before. We can get it when we start having a conversation. You know, maybe I'll cry, or I'll get angry, or I'll sulk and withdraw and not say anything. And then we often carry it with us afterwards, you know, into our personal lives. It can be there going round and round and round. And that's all around the problem of how we manage our emotions. And then look, if we're going to have a difficult conversation, we want change to be created, positive change. But quite often what we find is difficult conversations go on and on and on, and the change doesn't happen, or someone says they're going to do it, but you know that they won't. And that's down to, have we really created a psychologically safe space, and have we had the honest conversation that needs to happen? You have to get those three things right. I call them the three core components. You've got to structure the conversation well, you've got to manage the emotions, and build a psychologically safe space. And where those three kind of overlap in a Venn diagram, annoyingly, typically the smallest space, that's where you have the potential to have a very successful, difficult conversation. It's not guaranteed. There are other layers to it, but most people, once they know how to put those three things in place, you see a dramatic increase. You know, to the tune of, people have been having the conversation for a year, and then myself or my team shows them how to have that conversation with those three things in place, and one conversation fixes it, the person improves. And for me, the best fix is always improvement, not they leave. It's never my aim. Of course.
Yeah, there was a couple of things, well, there's lots of things I enjoyed in the book. As I've said, there's a couple of things I found particularly interesting, sort of around people haven't necessarily heard what you think they heard, or that you want them to have heard. Where you talk about in the book, you ask a group of leaders how often, or who would say it's a good idea, essentially, if two young people have been talking, the whole class have been kept back, and we essentially punish the whole group for the issues of a couple. And of course, they're kind of horrified about that, aren't they? And then you ask about how many people have sort of done that in a staff meeting, you know, to staff. And that's quite interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. I had a really wonderful, also slightly painful example with a group of heads I was working with. And exactly as you say, they were talking about how this teacher had kind of told the whole class off because two children didn't behave. And, you know, the kids went home, they were upset. Next day, a lot of parental complaints and issues, you know, raised because of this. Of course, the room of head teachers were aghast, understandably, because that's not on. But what I often find, and the example I think that's in the book is, it's things like checking emails. You've got 20 people in a room and you kind of remind them all to check an email. You know, can I remind you all, it's really important you check emails, keep up to date, so on and so forth. I'm using emails. There are plenty of other examples. And the reality is there are only two people in the room who aren't checking their emails. So all those who are doing it are kind of thinking, okay, I do. Either I do, why are you asking me? Or I better double check that I'm doing it, or do it more often. And all those who aren't, still aren't. And don't continue. And actually what we need to do is actually have the conversation with them in the same way if we were talking to children about their behaviour being unacceptable. We don't talk to a class of 30, we talk to 2. And when I shared that with the heads and kind of said, well, think of it this way, they all sat there and went, I've done that. I have spoken to everyone. And actually I don't get the change that I want because those 2 people still carry on doing what they were doing.
Why do you think we do that? Because I think I've done that. Well, I think I know the answer, but I'm interested to hear your thinking around why do you think leaders go for the I'll tell everyone at the same time approach rather than I'll just isolate those people and discuss it with them?
That's a really nice question. Diffusion. in a way, it's easier to kind of go, this is just a note to everyone, a reminder, instead of me saying, David, I noticed you haven't been checking your emails regularly, and I need you to make sure you check your emails at least once a day. So suddenly I'm talking to you, and here I am, and my heart rate will go up. Whereas everyone, can I just remind you, it's really important. Can you see how different that feels? So
absolutely.
What was your thinking behind it?
Well, no, that was exactly it. I think sometimes it's easier, maybe in terms of emotionally, because we're not as nervous if we just collectively say, can I just remind everyone this? Because then you think, oh, I've done that. Because the thought of saying, I've got to speak to these two people about exactly that, it can be quite stressful if we don't have the skills or the experience, perhaps, of how to just do that in a succinct, fair, we're not talking about being unkind, are we? But we think, oh, it could upset that person. But actually, if we don't have that, it can grow to a bigger issue, can't it, I suppose?
Definitely. And you're right, I'm a big... this is one of those things, like, this whole topic causes a great deal of pain for me, but it's a positive pain, if that makes sense. And the pain is this: it really doesn't have to be this hard. I've lost count also of the amount of times we have helped people see how they have, one of the real, we work on the real difficult conversations. We don't go, let's go hypothetical. When we work with people, we want to fix a real one so they can get that gain, but also apply the skills. I've lost count of how many people have emailed myself or one of the trainers in the team to say, thank you so much, I had the difficult conversation, and the person thanked me. And for me, these are about helping each other. They're not about, reprimanding or criticising or, pushing people down. Quite the opposite. And I think the fact that so many people say thank you to the person who had a successful, difficult conversation, it really shows that. I get they're scary, but again, back to your point, with not a huge amount of training, but with a bit of really powerful training, you can get really good at this very quickly, and you can see such a difference, and it makes everyone's lives better.
Do you think it's part of a wider cultural thing in the school then? How you create a culture of seeing feedback. I think you refer to it in here, feedback is a gift. This idea that, actually we're all here to improve. And by and large, everybody is. They want to come to work, do a really good job, and feel like they're contributing positively. So that culture, do you think that's really important then? So people see that as a benefit rather than a criticism?
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, for me, when difficult conversations are going really well, when you're in a high-performing culture, they're just feedback. And it's sought out. And even when it's hard, actually, it's in, you can do what you like with feedback. I always say you can either use it, park it, or say, actually, I don't think that's relevant. Because not all feedback is, for various reasons. But if you want a culture of excellence, you have to keep evolving. One of our values in Heads Up is evolving excellence, because we accept it's not an end goal. We don't get there and go, oh, done, we've got it. At the end, I think we do. We scrutinise our feedback forms. We give feedback to each other. When we run events or even webinars, there's always a debrief afterwards, going, right, what could we do? What was working, but what could we do better? It's just part of how we work. It's our language. At the same time, if we spotted things that actually aren't in line with who we are and what we're doing, then we don't need to wait for a specific moment to talk about that. We will raise it, and we understand that it's raised because we want to help each other improve, not because we want to criticise anyone. We want to lift everyone up. We're each other's cheerleaders, if you like. That's kind of the level I think we all need to get to, and it takes practice and skill. Absolutely.
I'm aware I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, so apologies. I'm going to come back to this in a second, but just on that point, you talk in here as well, I think towards the end, about having that sort of critical friend, somebody who you can really rely on to be absolutely honest with you, because you realize that it's a really trusting relationship and you're there to help each other. How important do you think that is for leaders to have, and does it always need to be somebody within the organization, do you think?
A wonderful question. I think as leaders, we're often starved of feedback. It might not feel like that way for heads. I realise you might be like, everybody's always telling me what I'm getting wrong and so on. But actually, I think we're starved of quality feedback. That feedback actually looks at us as a person, or looks at you as a person, and says, you know what, I really think these are your strengths. You shine at this. You do it so effortlessly, so well. You excel at it. Here, here are some things that jar or aren't working, or maybe some areas to improve. So I think as leaders, we're really starved of that because of the position that leadership holds. I'm not saying we're never criticised as leaders, of course. I know in schools that can feel kind of, it comes fast and furiously. In terms of having that critical friend, I think it kind of doesn't matter where you have them, as long as you've got that person who will give you really honest feedback when you need it. Obviously, if they are in the organisation, they can talk more about how you are in that context than perhaps a friend who doesn't see you. I think the more of these people you can have in your life, the better. One is great, two's even better. If you found 10, then I think that'd be a miracle, because I think actually it's a rare relationship and it's a very special relationship. So one would be plenty. If you can have a couple of contexts, that helps. But I think for leaders, there is a real starvation of quality feedback, of that feedback that really enables us to, or enables our leaders to actually excel even further than they already do. Quite often they're the ones who are providing the best quality feedback for everyone else.
But there is, again, in there some advice that you give around, well, if you are given feedback as a leader from someone else in the organisation, about how you deal with that feedback to model how feedback should be received. Could you just talk about that briefly? Would that be okay?
Yeah, so I think it's really important that as leaders we demonstrate how to receive feedback for two reasons. One, so that we model it for others, so they can see, okay, when they were giving, I gave them quite hard feedback, or actually, to be honest, they might not give them feedback that was structured very well, but the way in which you respond to that shows how we expect people to respond to feedback, but it also encourages people to give feedback. So it's things like, firstly, thanking them, and maybe even acknowledging, depending on the person, that it might have been quite hard for them to give you that feedback, because we've got a hierarchical system in place. It becomes difficult, as well as the personal relationship. And it can be really good to ask questions, not pointed questions, but just to explore it. And that's very useful, particularly if the feedback's not high quality feedback. People give feedback to different levels. It might be quite vague. It might feel quite like a personal attack. So asking questions instead of almost responding and refuting or disagreeing or anything like that can be a much more constructive way. And I think with feedback, if you can just go into it with an approach of, I'm curious. I had a great phrase a little while ago, actually, exchange furious for curious. Okay. And I think that works really well. Because again, no, I didn't do that. What do you mean I do that? I'm not saying you might respond like that, but you might be thinking or feeling that. Okay, I'm curious as to why they think they do that. I do that. I'm curious to know what I did to make them say that, to help really unpick it. Maybe ask what would have been preferable. So instead of the thing I did that perhaps someone didn't like or isn't conducive, okay, what would have been a better alternative? As I say, I think then it's your choice. Do you act on it? Do you park it? Which might be, I think it might be worth acting on, but I'd like a bit more evidence. I'm not sure if there really is meat behind it. And sometimes you discard it. And that might be because it's not actually feedback. Sometimes it can be a relationship issue.
Right.
Yeah. So you might think I'm a particular way, and that's because actually we just don't get on that well. So what I need to be careful of is taking that feedback and changing what I do, because actually the real issue is our relationship, and that's where the problem lies, not the feedback you're giving me. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Of course, if 3 different people give me that feedback, I need to start listening to that quite hard. Yeah. Okay. And if you can demonstrate how you take on board that feedback, tangibly show how you have embraced it, if you choose to make a difference. Yeah. If we don't lead and role model how to receive feedback, it's going to be really hard for our team to, and it will close the door on those few people who are brave enough to actually tell people in positions of leadership hopefully valuable pieces of feedback.
And also, I guess, if we're not taking on the feedback and acting on it, then when we then trying to give some feedback in a conversation, how can we expect that person to go ahead and act on that? So I think it's really good point. I wondered, because I'm aware we won't have time to go into all the aspects of structuring a difficult conversation, all the components. I wonder if you might be able to give us some quick fixes for people who can kind of take away some things when they're having difficult conversations, things to use.
Definitely. Yeah, no, I'd love to. So I would definitely recommend thinking about your opening sentence. It is honestly the single biggest mistake I see people make, and it's one of the reasons people don't go away with the real message that they need to hear, and it's because we're not clear. It's harder than you think to get right. Don't underestimate this first sentence. I sit there scribbling them out and working them out, and I'm going to share my structure just to help people understand what that is. So the structure I use for opening a difficult conversation is I, issue, the outcome. They're the 3 component parts. So we start with I instead of you. You know, David, you. I was finger pointy straight away, accusation. I'm going to start triggering things. So I've noticed, I feel, I'm aware, I believe, I've heard, whatever it is. Yes, there's a you coming, but it's a little bit softer and a bit later. The issue is, unsurprisingly, whatever the issue actually is. So it could be lateness, it could be not following the marking policy, it could be conduct, and in which case you've got to really break that down later. And then the outcome. So there's 2 things to pick up there with the issue and the outcome. With the issue, you must have examples that back up what you're saying. So if you're talking about lateness, when? And just jot them down. You might not need it. Someone might go, yeah, you're right, I've had real problems with the roads and so on. And you don't need to sit there going, yes, and you were late then, and you were late then, and you were late then. That's a bit cruel. But bizarrely, quite often, we'll raise something and someone will say, no, not. No, that didn't happen. And if you don't have the evidence there, you're just putting yourself on a back foot you don't need to be on. With the outcome, this is the mistake within the mistake. And this is where people really struggle in terms of really getting a strong, good outcome. So the key thing with the outcome, it's the change you want to see. So with something like lateness, it's relatively easy because what we're saying is we want you to be on time. Yeah. If you can be really specific about being on time, for example, in your classroom, ready to work by 8:30 a.m. Now, the reason I say that is quite often when I've been having one of the many conversations about lateness and TAs, they're in school at 8:30, but they're in the staff room, or no one knows where they are. So like, well, I was in at 8:30. You're like, yeah, but you weren't in class seeing what the day needs. So be really specific about what success looks like. That's what this is. It gets trickier as we start to move into things like, you know, anything around performance, which might be quality of lessons, differentiation, marking, and then even harder with the hardest kind of conversations, which are those around conduct and behaviour. What can often happen is people put a solution in place. So imagine with the receptionist, if I said to the receptionist, Mrs. Watt, I've noticed that you don't always welcome people who come to reception as warmly as I'd like. And if I said my outcome was, so I want you to smile whenever someone comes along. What I could get is this. Hello? Yes, how can I help? I'm smiling, aren't I? The corners are, it's like, that's not what I mean. Yeah. So actually the outcome is, I want you to warmly welcome people to school. Yeah. Yeah. So warmly suddenly changes things. Again, it could be even more specific. You need to unpick it for the actually, the actual real situation. Yeah. But that outcome, be really careful of putting a solution in. The quality of your lessons is not up to standard, so I need you to do more planning. People can do more planning, but not produce a high quality lesson. Actually, the outcome is the flip side of not being a high enough quality lesson. Your lessons need to be at least good, or whatever frame, mechanism, structures you're using in school, at least good every day. Or we need at least X number of lessons to start with to be at least good. But we almost put in this causal link that whilst it is likely to make a difference, it might not. There's not a definite line. There's a strong line between planning and quality lessons, but actually the end goal we want is quality lessons. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the solutions outcome thing was something when I read, I thought that's really interesting in terms of the example in the book about a parent who wants their child moved from this class into this class because they don't feel they're getting on well, making good progress. Well, the solution is moving them, but we don't want to do that. The outcome is their child feels happy, makes good progress in school, and the two things aren't the same, are they? Which I thought was a really, really good. I never thought of it like that, you know.
Yeah, there's a nice little game I play where I say to people, okay, which one do you want? So with that example of the parent, we can move your child. I mean, I wouldn't do this as bluntly with a parent, but this would be my thinking process when I'm looking at a sentence like that and going, is it right? Okay, so we could move the child, but they're still unhappy and they're not making good progress. Or we could keep the child in class, but they're somehow we make them happy and they're making good progress. I'm not interested in how we do it. Which one do you want more? Of course, it's going to be the answer presents itself, doesn't it? When we move and they're not happy and making progress, it's no good, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. So we can't, as I said, go through all elements of it, but that opening is really key, isn't it? That's not the most important, but as you say, it sets you up for the rest of the discussion. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, it does. Well, I pick on the opening most of all because it is the single biggest mistake I see people make. It does set you up for success. You still need the other components. Yeah, any one of those three things, if any one of them's missing, you know, the psychological safe space, managing the emotions, and the full structure, you can't reach a level of success that you could. But this is a good place to start.
Brilliant. For people watching, could you, and for me actually, could you give us your one best piece of advice to take away and use in our schools?
I love this question. Hold silence. We're all talking too much in difficult conversations and you're all working too hard in them. If you don't know what to say, hold a silence. Not a kind of one of these silences where perhaps I'm looking through a million pieces of paper, I'm making noise. Just hold a silence. I've been modelling difficult conversations sometimes with people and showing things, and there are points where I say, you held such a long silence there. I can't believe how long it was. And I'm like, yeah. You know why I held that silence? Like, no, tell us. I said, because I had no idea what to say next and I needed to think. And I'm literally sitting there thinking, I don't know what to say. Quite often by the time I've worked out where to go next in the conversation, the other person's gathered their thoughts and actually they move it forward and actually they should be the one who do in many instances. So I know they're anxiety and stressful situations and we can talk far more than we need to, but actually the balance of talking should sit more with the other person. And when I say talking, that includes their silences because they're thinking. Yeah, so the time when I'm sitting and waiting to hear from them should be more than the time they're sitting there listening to me. I know silences feel uncomfortable. A little trick that helps you out is if there's a clock over their shoulder, what feels like a day will be about 20 seconds. But just get comfortable with silences. They're just so powerful.
Okay. Thank you. What I could have done there is just said nothing for like 2 or 3 minutes just to sort of really emphasize that, but it would have got perhaps a bit odd.
Listen. I always think when I'm talking about silence, the one thing I haven't been is silent. But then if I sit there going, yes, this is my advice, and I sit there for 2 minutes, it might seem a bit weird.
That would be quite a good tip, wouldn't it? People are just hanging there waiting for that piece of advice, and actually the advice is, no, just say nothing. Listen, Sonia, thank you so much for your time this morning. I am going to do this again for anyone watching and just say how great this is as a book for someone like myself who's a senior leader in a school, and how important I think it is that we actually have those difficult conversations, and for all the points you've made this morning. Thank you so much for joining us.